Hi, my name is Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club, Upsize Minnesota, and my group, Club Entrepreneur, welcome to our discussion on mergers and acquisitions. The workshop today is going to help us get our arms around this complex and multi-layered topic. To help business owners better understand the myriad of best practices for the categories we're covering, Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur has assembled today's event. We're going to introduce a panel of experts who can serve as your trusted advisors. All right, we're getting some feedback here. I don't know if that's me or if you're hearing that back over there just a little bit. All right. Oh, okay. All right. We'll try to figure it out, whatever that might be. Anyway, Upsize Minnesota is a how-to business magazine helping business owners grow into larger and more profitable companies. Club Entrepreneur and my firm, Brimacombe & Associates, inspire business owners like you to basically achieve more than you thought possible. I do that by helping folks refine strategies, assemble resources, and secure financing. I invest, I advise, I start, and help folks buy companies. And I've been doing these events with Upsize Magazine for 4 or 5 years. For those of you who haven't been here before, welcome. And for those of you who didn't know, Upsize will cover the event in the next month's issue, as well as the video of the event will be on the clubby.com website, so that will be there for your future use. Anyway, to introduce you to our sponsors, Dominate with SEO is an internet marketing and SEO agency. Frederickson & Byron is a legal firm. Highland Bank is a locally owned community bank. Sunbelt Business Brokers is an M&A advisory firm, and Tech Guru is a technology services provider. So thank you very much to our sponsors. And with that, let me introduce you to our panelists. Working from my left, your right, right here on the end, Dan Moshe, president of Tech Guru. Lisa Holter, partner at Frederickson & Byron. Melissa Johnston, senior vice president at Highland Bank. Peggy Demuse is a business broker at Sunbelt. And Sam Romaine is co-founder of Dominate with SEO. I've had the opportunity to work with all 5 of these folks on companies I'm involved with, and I know from firsthand experience. All right. Anybody got any ideas over here? All right. Not sure why that helped, but. Okay. All right. I don't know. Sounds better. Okay. All right. Sorry for the technical difficulties. What? Yeah, nice, nice. That's why you get paid the big bucks, right? All right. Okay. So before we get going, the serious stuff, so the T-shirt. So if anybody was here around my Christmas events, I have a very nice red sport coat that I wear around Christmas that was my grandfather's. So you hear stories about that. Got the ties from my kids with the Santa stuff and Rudolph and all that. And then my kids have gone to De La Salle. So last fall, we were all big into the volleyball stuff. And then De La Salle basketball. My son played there. And if anybody cares, De La Salle has won a national record 6 straight state tournaments. They're playing for their 7th, and so we kind of drink the Kool-Aid for De La Salle, and in particular the De La Salle basketball. So we have a little calendar here. We have January, we have February, and then we have Islanders, as in March in basketball, the De La Salle Islanders, April and May. So anyway, that's the T-shirt. We're going De La Salle basketball. All right, which is happening right now, and if I hadn't told these folks I would be here, and if Wes Bergstrom of Upsize wouldn't get too angry at me for not hosting the event, I definitely would be at the basketball game. All right, so with that said, let's go back to our panel after we diverted there. Again, I've worked with everybody here. They can do a great job for you. I have stories, good ones on all of them. So please feel free to seek them out afterwards. if you would like additional information. Once we get to the Q&A, I have questions here, but please raise your hand and we'll insert you into the conversation once we get to that part of the conversation. All right, so with that as background, why don't you all take, say, a minute or two and give me a little bit more color on what you all do. And Dan, let's start with you.
Hey, thanks, Rick. Daniel Moshe, founder and CEO of Tech Guru, the caring technology company that we were founded 14 years ago. And today we focus on CPA firms and nationwide and providing IT managed services from help desk to managing all the myriad of devices all the way down to practice management software. I also am an EOS professional implementer. EOS stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and I help companies and leadership teams get more of what they want from their businesses. Thank you.
And he is a caring company because he's been doing on his own time a little project for me for the last couple of days. So I'm grateful to Dan for that. Lisa, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I'm Lisa Holter. I'm a shareholder with Frederickson and Byron. We're a full-service law firm here in the Twin Cities. And I practice corporate and business law. I work with privately owned companies primarily, and both family owned and private equity group owned. And I say I work with businesses sort of in the life cycle of a business. So when you'd form your entity, bring in a partner, raise money, bring in employees, maybe want to incent them with ownership, sell your product and need agreements relating to sales and distributors. And another key event is acquiring another business through growth or when you retire, selling your business. And so in terms of my role and kind of what I do, a good example is something I talked with a client about this week. He is selling his business, and we talked about structure along the way, and he reached out with some questions about an earnout. And I was able to say, well, you're going to find there's an earnout in about 75% of deals, and in about 80% of the time, it'll be for 10% of the purchase price or less. And 30% of the time, it's going to last about a year. So I can give a good sense of the market terms for typical terms and help educate and inform him. But then I said, you know, you're asking these specific questions. Do you have a letter of intent? And he said, well, yes, in fact, I do. And I said, well, let me take a look at that. So I gave him comments then. He sent it over, and within an hour, we're talking again. And I pointed out that the letter of intent was binding, which is not typical, binding on him as the seller. And with regard to the buyer, it said it's binding on the buyer subject to financing and material issues and due diligence. So we had a discussion about the ways in which financing and due diligence would be a big out for a seller, and in essence, for practical purposes, it was not binding. I mean, for the buyer. It was not binding for the buyer. And it also had an exclusivity period through July. So that meant if the buyer was dragging its feet or he wasn't happy with how the negotiations were going, he was pretty much stuck for 4 months until that LOI would terminate. So in giving him feedback early on, I think I set him up to have more leverage negotiating as he really gets into the meat of the deal and the purchase agreement with the buyer.
Great. Thank you very much. And Lisa and I met probably about 15 years ago or so, and we've crossed paths a number of times over the years. And thank you very much for participating today, Lisa. Melissa, you and I have also known each other for a number of years. And tell us a little bit more about your background and Highland Bank.
Yes. So my name is Melissa Johnston, and I'm a senior business banker at Highland Bank, focusing on mergers and acquisitions. I've been in banking for 16 years, and I started my career at a bank holding company where we were buying other banks. So I served on the due diligence team, and we looked seriously at buying 5 banks and ended up purchasing 2. And now I enjoy being on the front line at Highland Bank, where I get to talk with entrepreneurs every day who are considering merging with another company or buying another business. And I look through the lens of really being a business advisor. So looking at the financial statements of the company that they're looking to acquire, whether you're an individual or a business, and then discussing various post-sale scenarios. Highland Bank was founded in 1943, and we have been owned by the same family since the mid-70s. We're a private community business bank, independent, and our second generation owners, Liz Lee and Rick Wall, are here with us today. And in the 70s, we merged 2 charters, and in 2007, we bought Ridgedale State Bank. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And Peggy Demuse, I've worked with Peggy both on sell-side deals where clients of mine and companies I was involved with came to Peggy and Sunbelt and worked on the sell side, and then also have interacted with her on the buy side. So Peggy, tell us a little bit about you and Sunbelt.
Thanks, Rick. So my background is accounting and finance. I like to say I'm a recovering accountant, but spent years in both Fortune 500 companies as well as in smaller organizations. After working with primarily Fortune 100 companies for 20-some years, I decided to branch out on my own and started a small business. After about a year into that, I quickly decided that that probably wasn't the right fit for me and went to Sunbelt to go get some help in getting it sold. Once I sat down with Sunbelt and could see really what Sunbelt did, I thought that was a perfect fit, not only to sell the company, but for me to go work there afterwards. So I sold my business using Sunbelt, and since then I have been working with Sunbelt. And if you are not familiar with Sunbelt, we are really the world's largest business broker. So we have offices throughout the United States, we have international offices, and here in the Twin Cities, we've got an office in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We work together as a team, and we've got about 50 people in our organization here in the Twin Cities. And our role is really to help business owners understand the current value of their business, and then if they're ready to sell, help them bring it to market so that we really maximize that sale price, and work through a number of items that I'm going to come back to with things Lisa just talked about. But we really help business owners understand how to get it packaged up, what buyers are looking for in terms of really what is the key things that buyers want when they're buying an acquisition, and then get it structured and positioned well to go on the market for sale. We also obviously work with a lot of buyers who are looking to buy businesses, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but I want to touch on a couple things that Lisa brought up. She talked about, the seller coming in with a binding LOI. Lisa, found that right away. First of all, our goal with sellers is to not get them in a binding LOI, to not take their business off the market, to keep it on the market while a seller's going through due diligence. And then also, so that was the exclusivity. Oh, and the earnouts. So I'll talk about that just a little bit too. But the other thing I would say for any seller that's really had a buyer come to them and say, I'd really like you to, to buy your business, make sure that you're getting a fair price and it's a market value. One buyer really is not a buyer, and you've got no leverage if you start down that path with that buyer without really working through that. So it's a perfect time to bring in some professional advice, whether it's, Lisa, Melissa, myself, anybody, accountant, but you need some professional advice to make sure you're not leaving money on the table.
Great.
I'll stop with that.
Thank you. So Sam Romaine is a co-founder of Dominate with SEO. Brian Berg is somewhere over here. Brian's his partner there. So Sam and Brian have done a handful of projects with me and companies that I'm working with in the last 6 months or so, and they've done a great job. So Sam, tell us a little bit more about Dominate with SEO and your background.
Sure. So Sam Romaine, founder and I guess COO of our company. We focus primarily on digital marketing, which is kind of a unique mix to the group here. But we have a strong background. I've been doing digital marketing myself for about 12 years, which is about 50% of my lifetime. So it's kind of fun. We've been doing the client side of our agency for about 2.5, going on 3 years now. So internet marketing is truly our roots. But what we can bring to the table as far as this discussion goes is our company and our team has a very unique ability to analyze the potential market of a business you may be looking to buy or acquire, or even the value of your current existing digital assets and domain of your company you have now. So we have a couple cool stories that we'll share as the discussion continues. It'll be kind of fun.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for joining us. Okay, coming back down here, starting with Dan. So you've introduced yourself, and everybody's gotten a sense to get to know a little bit more about the panel. Spend 2 or 3 minutes each maybe talking about kind of your lens into this topic and things that you'd like to share. And I know you have a handout on the table as well, so tell us more, Dan.
All right, thanks, Rick. So on many of the tables, there's a handout, and then if there's not one in front of you, I apologize. I brought 75 copies in this event. Rick did a beautiful job of promoting. We've got a great turnout today. So feel free to grab one if there's none not in front of you, or contact me and I'll send you a copy of it as well. And Rick has only allowed me 2 or 3 minutes, and I think that's why he sat me close to him. I don't know, what did I do last time?
Yeah, Dan was on the end last time, and he got a little off track, so here he's kind of close, and I can keep a better eye on him.
Kind of sit next to the teacher now. Anyway, so since I only got 2 or 3 minutes, I thought I'd highlight maybe just a couple of these, and then if you want to learn more about any of the ones that we don't have time to cover today, feel free to reach out and contact me. I'd love to conversate with you about those. So my lens here is to talk about, I think I'm going to talk about the very first one, that nowadays to build enterprise value and to, thank you, to increase enterprise value and build something that's really, that someone's going to want to pay a premium for. It used to be the case that you needed to build your own software and have a intellectual property. Now, if you're a software development company and that is what you do, you write software, then by all means, go ahead and create some software that is unique in the marketplace. But if that's not your core competency, then the number one do from this is to customize and fully implement. I'm going to break that down. Take software that's been designed for your industry and then customize it to what makes your business unique and special. So sometimes it's tempting to take software off the shelf and then meld your business into that software, and then you become kind of vanilla. And then I always advocate for, when I help clients identify and implement software, that it's usually a two-way street. So it's a combination of taking learnings from this new business application and implementing to your business, and then also customizing that software in such a way that your business's secret sauce is woven into that business and how you sell and how you deliver those services or products to your clients. That software is really helping you accomplish that. So if your business is still running off of spreadsheets and Word docs, now is the time. There's some great ways now to buy software. Before, it used to be that you'd have to make a really large capital investment up front, buy a server, install it, and then a lot of expense ongoing to maintain it. Nowadays, the barriers are a lot easier, lower to acquire leading, cutting-edge software that will help take your business to the next level. And because it is some software that's supported and provided by an outside provider, it actually is more of an asset than if it's something that you own and have to maintain. And a lot of times, people don't realize there's ongoing costs to maintaining custom software as well that can be significant. So I'd say I'd bop down to the fourth bullet point now for my next point, which is to be at the top of the adoption continuum and maximize return on investment, mitigating risk. I'll break that all down. Sorry for the jargon. So there's this curve. It's a natural curve that we talk about in technology, the adoption curve. And so anybody heard of the bleeding edge? Bleeding edge? So I love to be on the bleeding edge, but there's risk with that. There's potential failure, that there's something that we might adopt or use that won't be here tomorrow, or that it'll fail or not work the way that we expect it to. And then there's the trailing edge. You don't have to raise your hand, but I know there's a few here that prefer to be on the trailing edge. You're still using that Palm Trio, if anybody remembers that.
BlackBerry.
Oh, BlackBerry? Okay, so that'd be the trailing edge. So what I'm advocating for here to build enterprise value and maximize the value of your business when it comes to that point, when you do want to make a transition, is to be at more or less the top of that continuum, which is where software has been tried and tested and proven, and the companies that are behind that software are going to be around for the long haul. So that's my point there. So avoid being on the bleeding edge or the latest tech fads. And then maybe, do I have more time for one more?
Quick one.
Okay, quick one. This is my favorite. Probably it's the third from the bottom. It's managing by dashboards rather than reports. So this is how we've transitioned over the years in our IT services business, is live dashboards, which are reports, but they're just updated continuously, usually with a visual component, so that we can make changes and react to changes in demand or excess capacity or not enough capacity really in real time before it's too late. Whereas, again, reporting usually means it's already happened, it's generally too late to do anything significant about it, and the train has already left the station. So when you're looking for software, look for software that either integrates with performance dashboards or that has them built in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Lisa, tell us a little bit about your perspective on the topic and maybe some of the key takeaways you want the audience to have.
Yeah. So as an attorney, in an M&A process, I'm usually, there's some key things that I'm working with my clients on, and I'll talk about here. One is structuring the transaction, and the other is kind of some nits of the purchase agreement. Structuring the transaction, there's really two kinds of deals, a stock deal and an asset deal. A stock deal is where you're going to sell the entire company, the ownership interests of the company, shares or units, membership interests get sold. The seller in that case is the owner, the shareholder, the member, the partner. They're the ones selling the business, and the business just changes hands. Group A owns it before the sale, Group B owns it after the sale. An asset deal, on the other hand, is where the existing business sells. They're the party to the transaction, and assets move individually or, as a group to the buying entity, and the selling entity still exists after the deal is over. A stock deal is subject to one level of tax, and an asset deal, if you're a corporation, is subject to two levels of tax. So there are different mechanisms to accomplish the two types of transactions, and they have different tax implications. Generally, sellers like stock deals because it's subject to one level of tax at capital gains rates, and it's an easy transaction. You have an ongoing business, there's continuity, and you usually don't have as many consents and third-party consents and approvals to get. However, buyers tend to like asset deals. They get a step up in the basis of the assets and then can depreciate that amount or amortize that amount. So there's a tax benefit to doing a deal that way. They can also pick and choose amongst the assets and liabilities that they want or don't want. So there you've got this tension between the two kinds of structures, and I will work with my clients to figure out which is the best way to do it and how you might bridge that gap then between the buyer and the seller. I've worked with I worked with one client years ago selling a small hot dog stand business, and the client was the daughter of the founder who was ill. And she was working on her father's behalf to sell the business for him, and it was pretty much his only retirement savings. She thought she was selling the whole business and had signed a letter of intent when she came to me. In fact, the letter of intent talked about the business being sold, but then it actually used terminology relating to an asset sale and transfer of assets. And so it was clear the buyer was pricing it and as an asset transfer, which would have been subject to 2 levels of tax. So we stopped right there and talked about the implications and worked to restructure the deal in that case. Another area that I help my clients with is with the purchase agreement. Many sellers think that the buyer's going to do its due diligence and take a look at the company, enter into an agreement, and when the transaction closes, that's it. The seller's done. They get the purchase price and they walk away, and that's the end of it. And that is not the typical case. Sellers are usually making significant representations and warranties about the condition of the business. That goes along with the buyer's due diligence, but the buyer relies on the reps and warranties that the sellers make. And so sellers are on the hook typically for 1 or 2 years after closing with regard to the condition of the business and may have to return some or all of the purchase price. So the purchase agreement is going to set that forth. Obviously, it'll contain the purchase price and how it's paid, earnouts and escrows, but it'll also have lengthy and detailed provisions called representations about the business. And it'll go to who are your customers? Are you dependent on customers? What's the quality of your receivables? Are you in compliance with laws? Tell us about your real estate. Give us copies of your, attached are copies of our leases. And there are usually around 30 or so of these separate representations and warranties, and they form the basis for 2 things. They expand on the buyer's own due diligence by providing affirmative information the seller is telling the buyer, and then they form the basis of claims, rights the buyer has under the purchase agreement to make a claim if there's a breach of the rep and warranty after closing. So part of the process in the sale involves the seller describing how its business may not exactly be compliant with the rep and warranty and putting that information on a schedule which will ultimately become part of the purchase agreement. And then another part is negotiating the terms for indemnification with the buyer. Indemnification typically lasts a year or so or more, and a buyer's going to want a longer period of time, a seller's going to want a shorter period of time. Generally, there's a lot of negotiation around this, and you might look for caps, maximum amount a seller's liable for, baskets or thresholds until you hit XYZ and claims are a certain dollar amount, there is no liability. For certain matters where the liability exposure is greater, like taxes or environmental compliance, you'll see higher caps and longer time frames. The agreement will also have things like how your conduct after closing, and for a seller that's typically a non-compete, and those can last up to 5 years. 2 to 5 years is a typical time frame. So a large part of my role is working at the beginning on structure, but then really through the process advising on the terms of the purchase agreement as it's negotiated.
Great, thank you. Melissa, tell us a little bit about your thoughts from the banking side of things and some of the key takeaways you want the audience to have today.
Sure, thanks, Rick. So key takeaways from my perspective are for both buyers and sellers to set up their team of experts early on in the process. There are a number of resources out there for buyers and sellers to really put together a solid team, and it may include some people up here like us, a business attorney, an accountant, a business banker, a financial advisor, and after today I'm probably going to say an internet marketing agent, right, Sam?
Absolutely.
So to just really assemble that team as a buyer, this is the financial Super Bowl of your life, and it's not an area that you want to be skimping on professional fees. Make sure that your team of advisors understands their role and they're not overlapping, and they're really interested in your success as a buyer. Also, in assembling the team, I recommend that buyers shop around for financing. Just because their depository institution makes business loans doesn't mean that that institution is the right partner for them to do an acquisition. And it's important to find a good banker that knows how to structure these types of deals and can be a sounding board for you as a buyer as you're going through the due diligence process. And then someone that can really be a champion for you within the bank and within the business community after you close on the deal. So not all business bankers are created equal in this space. And I just encourage you to talk with your peers, talk to your experts in your center of influence, and make sure you find the right partner for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Peggy, tell us a little bit about your lens into this subject.
Sure. There's two different areas that we focus on. So one is M&A, which we really define as businesses with more than $10 million in revenue. And the other is what we call Main Street or business brokerage, which is the majority of the businesses out there. So I'm going to focus on that for right now. Our goal, again, is to find as many buyers as we can for the business and try to get an auction going. So in our lens, we really feel like one buyer is no buyer. And unless you've got some pressure on that buyer, what we see happen on a regular basis is that that buyer will take 3 months, 6 months, maybe 9 months, do due diligence, kick things around, and then say, oh, no, maybe not. And then the seller goes into that same process with another one buyer. And they take their time, and maybe they close, maybe they don't. But part of our goal is to really keep the pressure on the buyer to get through their due diligence and get the transaction closed. So I guess from a multifaceted approach, one, we're going on the market. We're looking for as many qualified buyers as possible. We're screening the buyers. We're going to make sure that they've got the financing and the ability to close on a transaction. And we're also going to make sure they've got the right background and skill set to be a good fit. Assuming those criteria are met, they'll sign off on a confidentiality agreement and a non-disclosure agreement, at which time we'll share a profile that we've written up on the business. And those profiles are really not meant to be just a quick 1 or 2 page summary on the business, but really go in depth and talk through the business and how it's gotten started, what some of the critical timeline has been for the business and how it's grown and developed over the years. We also go into details on customer concentration, employees, what their roles are, what a new owner should expect to take on as far as their role in the transaction. That's all part of the profile on the business, which really helps set the stage for them reviewing it with their accountant and their attorney. What's also included in there is purchase price allocation, whether it's an asset sale, whether it's a stock sale, how the purchase price is allocated, what the purchase price is, and how we expect it to be paid, whether there's some seller financing or it's bank finance. So it's all in there. So a buyer really can take that book and go to their accountant and attorney and do a review based on that. Certainly we're here to help them get through the process. While we don't represent the buyers, we're here to help them get through the process to make sure we get the deal done in a timely manner. So I guess that's probably the highlights of what I've got.
All right, great, thank you. Sam, tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, the topic that we're after here today.
Sure. So, interestingly enough, our team actually just consulted on a project that involved 3 banks that are primarily in the commercial lending space. They merged to make one new bank that was to become a multi-billion-dollar bank. And their website previously was doing very well, had a lot of traffic, a lot of inbound leads. They were getting a lot of business from it. And post-merger, because they didn't manage their digital assets properly, they went to virtually 0 traffic on their website, which from our standard industry metrics on conversion, basically they went from 200 new leads per month of commercial deals down to 0. And so I don't know what a customer is worth to a bank, but I'm sure it's a lot of money at that point. So like circling back a little bit, don't skimp out on hiring professionals to help you through the process, because I think that we could have saved them a significant amount of money had they just had a 5-minute conversation with us before making this change. There's actually, interestingly enough, we just came across this yesterday, which was kind of convenient timing, not so much on a merger acquisition, but similar situation where this company redid their website and changed a lot of the structure of their website, and they lost, again, all of their traffic, and they went from 60% of their new business came directly from organic search, and from December to March, they had exactly 0 hits from search engines to their website. Again, that's another instance where that's a significant amount of money for them that they lost because they didn't manage their digital assets. So the main focus that I'm trying to show here is that your online assets are very important, right? And they make you a lot of money. So let's not forget about what's fueling your company.
Great. Hey, so as I mentioned earlier, I will open it up to questions here in a couple of minutes. Let me ask everybody kind of one more question, and then you all can chime in. Let's stay down there, Sam. So what actually do you consider when deciding what social media accounts to preserve, how to handle the domain names, and some of the other things that you have to look at?
Sure. So we don't play as much in the social media space, but I will say that I think Facebook, LinkedIn, and one other one, they have a way that you can merge your accounts, which is pretty simple. You usually have to put in a support ticket to them to merge those accounts. I know Twitter and Instagram, from my last understanding, you're not able to merge those accounts. So my suggestion would be to make the announcement repeatedly to your users on those platforms that you're merging or you're switching profiles. And then once you have made the switch, to not delete the profile, because then you invite what we call squatters on your name, which could do damage to your brand, but just deactivate it so you still hold that name so no one can take it, right? But it's just closed down at this point. But as far as the domain, now that's a whole different beast. There's a lot of things that go into what make up the power and authority of your domain, which does fuel into your organic search traffic. And so it's hard when you don't understand how domains work to really value the traffic. And it would be, I don't want to cannibalize all of our time here going too in depth, but there are certain ways you can determine the strength and the power of this domain based on a number of different industry standards that we use. Aside from just looking at traffic, though, there used to be a thing called PageRank, which we used quite a lot, but I think that died in 2014 now. So there's other metrics we use to gauge that. Again, I don't know, to not cannibalize your time, my call to action here would be, if you guys really want to get an idea of how powerful the domains are in your merger acquisition, feel free to give us a call. It's a pretty quick thing for us to take a look at, and I'd be more than happy to throw that offer out to everyone in the audience here today that we would look at that with you. Okay,
great. All right, weaving our way back here. Peggy, you alluded to a little bit of the one buyers, no buyers. So talk a little bit about who are the actual buyers of smaller companies and how you go about developing the list.
Okay, so what we're seeing as far as actual buyers of these companies tend to be either somebody that's in their mid-40s to mid-50s, has had a significant career with a good company, has saved up a fair amount of money, and has either just gotten laid off or is just tired of the rat race. And they've decided that they want to take this time in their life to start their own business or own their own business and have something that they can have a lot more control of and have a lot more say in their own life going forward versus following the employee track. So that's a very, very good buyer for us, and there's a lot of them out there. It's amazing how many of those people are floating around. And then the other bucket I see a lot of people in are actually younger folks who are going about this as, I want to build a portfolio of companies. And they're buying, fairly small companies, but their goal is to kind of build those and have a whole portfolio of them. And they put managers in place, and then they go buy the next one and get that up and running and put a manager in place. And it's really interesting to watch this transpire. It's really, people are saying, hey, I'm not trusting the stock market as much as I used to. I don't want to have all my apples in that one basket. and so I'm gonna build my own basket. So that's primarily the two types of buyers. We keep a very thorough database. We've got about 14,000 buyers in our database that are based out of Minneapolis, Twin Cities area. And we're able to go back and say, who looked at a manufacturing business that's located in the western suburbs? And kind of get a whole list of who's looked at those in the last, couple of years, 3 years, 4 years. We can go back quite a while. And then we can approach them proactively if we get that business coming forward. So, excuse me, it's a great tool for us to have, that we can really go back, see who's looked at these similar types of businesses that could be a good fit, and then go proactively back out to those buyers and say, hey, that one wasn't, but maybe this one is. So.
Great, thank you. Melissa, you talked a little bit about some different kind of loan options, or you alluded to it earlier. Tell us a little bit about what some of the loan programs are available to buyers, and then in particular, SBA is a kind of preferred way to go from a banking perspective as well as a buyer perspective. The SBA now, as I hear, is requiring less down than they used to, so explain that a little bit to us as well.
Sure. So, financing options abound. For the sake of today, I'll focus on bank loan options. And for the larger deals, those I would say with a debt load of $5 million or above, they're typically financed in layers, with a senior debt holder taking on about 70 to 75% of the deal, mezzanine lender doing a quarter of that amount, and then a quarter of the purchase price coming in as cash equity from a buyer. And then, as Lisa mentioned, a seller financing 10% or so of the deal with either an earnout or a seller financing piece. For example, if the transaction size is $20 million, the senior lender might do $12 million, the mezz lender might do $2 million, borrower's cash at $4 million, and then the seller at $2 million for an earnout. The smaller deals where the loan amount, as Rick said, SBA, those would be the smaller deals where the loan amount is $5 million or less. Those are commonly financed with the SBA program, and it's really a terrific way for individuals, as Peggy described, as corporate refugees, where they want to buy a business and they're more of a financial buyer, and they have a significant shortfall in collateral. So the SBA program is a nice bridge for that shortfall. And in order for a bank to process those SBA loans on their own, they must be a preferred SBA lender, which means they have a delegated authority from the SBA. So they can structure those deals on their own, and our SBA manager, Kim Story, I think is the best SBA loan structure in the Twin Cities. She's been with us almost 2 decades and has been really helpful in putting those deals together so that we don't have to send them into the SBA, which is then subject to additional scrutiny and restructuring and however the SBA wants to do the deal, on top of the time delay when you send your deals in. Sometimes it can feel like a black hole to get an answer back from the SBA. And then I guess to talk about kind of lenders' appetite in terms of the SBA rules changing, there was a pretty big change. The SBA's fiscal year end is at the end of September, so October 1st. Previously, the rules were 25% down, and that could be a combination of seller financing and borrower's cash. And when I talk to brokers like Peggy and investment bankers around the Twin Cities, I'm finding out that even though the rules have changed, the lenders haven't really changed their programs. They're maybe looking for 20% down now instead of 25%. But it's been really tricky for lenders to get comfortable with only 10% down, because these deals, as I mentioned, are highly leveraged, and lenders are really looking for a cash flow cushion on a buyout. The rules previously would allow for a bank and a seller to essentially finance an entire deal for a buyer. And the SBA didn't like that. So they came in and said the buyers need to put down 10% cash, no matter what. The rule is 10% cash. Again, if you don't follow the rules, you send it in and they get to pick out the structure they want. But it's 10% cash now from a buyer, and they're silent on the seller financing. So banks haven't, in the conversations I've had around the metro, banks haven't really changed their parameters much. If they have, it's going from 25% down maybe to 20%, with 10% coming from the seller and 10% coming from the buyer. The credit folks are concerned about a few things, one of which is that the bank regulators won't necessarily align their strategies with the SBA. So the credit team is concerned that when the auditors come in and look at the file, they're not going to necessarily have the same risk appreciation as the SBA. And so the major thing that has changed is previously, in order for seller financing to get counted as equity, it had to be on standby for 2 years, meaning no payments of principal and interest. And that was a little tough for some sellers, as Peggy can relate to. But now banks are counting seller financing as equity, even if it's not on standby for 2 years. So the seller can start collecting payments right after the closing, even though the bank is still considering that as equity, and as long as the seller is subordinated to the bank's debt. So there should be more deals getting done now with SBA financing because of the rules getting changed, I guess until the SBA decides to change their rules again. So that's why we have Kim. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Melissa. Lisa, you spoke a little bit earlier about reps and warranties. As a follow-up to that, have you seen reps and warranties insurance? And if so, how does that work?
Yeah, good question. You know, I was talking about this tension between the buyer and the seller in the purchase agreement with regard to indemnification. That's where it comes into play, where the seller is on hook for breaches of reps and warranties about the business and may have to return some portion of the purchase price. So we've seen a lot of activity with M&A insurance or rep and warranty insurance, and it really helps bridge that gap. It's been around for about 15 years, but was pretty expensive, and the underwriting process was a little cumbersome and slow, which meant that it wasn't highly used, and that's been changing. I'd say we see it most frequently in deals of about 20 million or more. Just because of the cost, you have to have a deal of a certain size. Either the buyer or the seller can obtain the coverage. Buyers, though, get a better package, so usually you'll see the buyer obtain it. That doesn't mean they're the ones that pay for it. The parties will negotiate that. You don't cover the entire purchase price. You tend to cover 10 to 30% of the purchase price because you know, parties don't go into a deal anticipating that the entire value of the business might be some unknown risk or liability. You'll have a retention in the insurance, and it's like a deductible before the party who's got the insurance can submit a claim, or the amount in excess of that is what they'll receive on the claim. And those retentions are usually 1 to 3% of the purchase price. And premiums range between 2 and 4%. This is all going to be very dependent upon the market and the insurer. But if you had a $20 million deal, you'd probably get $6 million of coverage, and you'd probably pay $120,000 to $180,000 for your policy, just to give you some kind of big picture numbers. But it can really help a deal close more quickly. And for parties where the problem is not what you know and how to allocate those costs and expenses, it's the unknown things, the unknown risks, what hasn't been identified. And it's a great way of giving comfort, particularly for a seller who's hoping to close to walk away, I think, at the time they sell their company.
Great, thank you. Dan, swinging background to technology, Sam talked a little bit about social media and domains. Talk a little bit about online reputations and how online reputations come into play when people are trying to figure out the value of their business.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I think there's two components to online reputation and credibility, and know that this is not something that I specialize in or something that we provide at Tech Guru, but something that we experienced. And all it takes is kind of, if you only have a handful of reviews, for example, on Google Maps, Google Search, or maybe Yelp, it just takes like one or two random people that you don't even know who they are to post a bad review, and then every time somebody searches for your company's name on Google or Yelp, you look really bad with a 1 or 2 star review. So previously it was off our radar because we're not direct to consumer anyway. We serve businesses. So we were like, who really cares what our Google review or Facebook review or whatever is? And then there's also employee review sites such as Glassdoor. And we don't have anybody on Glassdoor at the moment, but we've decided to take a proactive approach to the reviews instead of a reactive approach. In other words, we've started to, during account reviews with our clients, who of course say they love us, we say, hey, would you mind sharing that with the rest of the world? And worst case scenario, we at least created a buffer for ourselves in the event that some random person mistakes our Tech Guru with the Tech Guru television channel in India. It happens. And of course, they don't know what they're reviewing, and there's nothing that we can do about it because those sites tend to be pretty user-centric and less kind of focused on what we, as you can imagine, those websites would lose their credibility if the companies listed could just go and delete all the reviews they didn't like, right? All of a sudden, those websites become less credible. So I think that's the first component. And then we've been also sort of, when you think about reputation and you think about M&A, think about how the valuation of, for example, Yahoo, right? If anybody followed that several years ago, when they were being purchased by Verizon. And so from a technological standpoint, it's not fun to talk about security and backup and encryption and all that kind of good stuff, but it's the type of thing that's going to protect your company's value and make it so that as you go through and you've made all these representations and warranties about, and I've just made some assumptions that maybe there are some things about technological safeguards that may happen to be in place, that you think about those things and make sure that the data that you're selling or would like to sell or that you're considering in the valuation of your company is protected and secure. If Yahoo, a technology company, is vulnerable, all of us are certainly vulnerable.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I have more questions, but they covered the stuff that I wanted to make sure they got to. So if there were questions here, I will work you in. Otherwise, I will keep going. So anything, Rob? So the question, if you didn't hear it over here, was cash flow or cash payments and getting out soon versus being tied up with either an employment agreement or an earnout.
Yeah. It's going to really depend on the business. If you've got your business structured where you have a pretty good management team in place, you're able to get out quicker. If you're in a position where, you know, you're the cog in the wheel, it's going to take a little bit longer to get out. But, you know, the banking has been great. The banks are definitely loaning, so a lot of sellers are able to get out with 90% of the sale price, and then they have some training and transition, but again, that's just going to depend on the business and how instrumental you are to the business going forward.
Yeah, and I would say another factor is really in negotiating for price, you could have two different prices, one for a cash out and one if you were willing to provide some financing as a seller or take some money in an earn out. If your company is poised for strong growth but doesn't have a history the last trailing 12 months of those same metrics, a buyer is not going to want to pay for potential, but you as the seller might not want to leave that money on the table. So you might want to negotiate for an earnout because it gives you more potential, but you'll want to think about the amount of cash you are taking at closing and to make sure it works for the deal overall.
And then I wasn't sure when I was going to weave it in, but that kind of opened the gate. So the book, Built to Sell, is very relevant to this conversation. And the Cliff Notes version is trying to get your company to a point where it can survive without you. With that said, it's a book well worth reading. John Warrilow is the author, and I'd highly recommend it. Anyway, so Built to Sell. All right, I saw a couple other hands come up. Yes, over here.
Yeah.
So let me repeat the question in case people didn't hear it. So the question was, with an earnout, you, in theory, now don't have full control, but how do you manage that control, and how do agreements get structured so that you have enough control that you feel comfortable absorbing this earnout as part of the deal? Lisa.
Yep, that's a really good point. And so those are some of the provisions you want to think carefully about when you're putting the earnout provisions together. It might be the case that the owner-seller is going to work in transition for a time period under an employment agreement or consulting agreement, and that can give them some comfort. But I'd say you probably want a little more protection, and you're going to want some definition about what the company, how it will be operated. I see strong buyers and private equity buyers really resist any specific do's or don'ts, and will go with more of a reasonableness, good faith standard. But some specifics we'll see are if the company is going to be sold to another party during the time frame of the earnout, you'll see an acceleration provision so that they can't get out of paying that extra consideration by selling the company. And that's particularly relevant with private equity buyers, where they do tend to serially acquire, grow it through more acquisition, and then sell. You'll also want to think about if the business you're selling is being brought into a larger business, keeping it as a separate division and requiring that the buyer do that so that the numbers are more pure and are more comparable to the numbers of the business before it was sold, because most earnouts are going to be based on a growth of revenue, hitting a revenue target, hitting EBITDA, but it's all going to be based on the business of or just that business. So if it's being folded into a larger organization, you'll want to have some specificity about that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, over here. Yeah. If you couldn't hear it over here, how many owners stay on, and then how long do they stay on?
Okay, I'll take that. It's interesting. I'm working on one right now where the owner really has built the business up. He's not necessarily the cog in the wheel, but he is very instrumental in driving a big chunk of the sales. He is going to stay on in a training and transition position, basically, for 3 months as part of the deal. But there is an earnout structured in as part of this because he does have all the vendor relationships. And so because of that, there is a small earnout that's structured. And he made a great comment to me just the other night saying, I'm really looking at this, I'll just make up a number here, $150,000 is my salary for the next year, which is a great way to look at it. As long as those revenues hit, he's making all his money. So keeping that in mind, that you don't want to just let the new buyer go flail. Mm-hmm. You need to be there to support them, and you want to be there. Most business owners, they've spent a lot of time building their business. They want to see it continue. So you want to make sure that you're there to help support.
Are they usually getting a salary, or are they just getting their earnout?
So in this particular instance, he's, the 3 months of training and transition was part of the purchase price, and then he's getting the earnout. It's not a salary on top of it. I have had owners that have stayed on and have gotten a salary. Sometimes owners really want that. They're like, I want to take off being the owner or operator, but I still like what I do. I just want to do this. And so those can be very nice transactions too. Does that?
Well, you already, we'll see, give somebody else a shot.
One thing, Rick, can I add on to that?
Yeah, sure, Melissa, yeah.
So if the deal is getting financed with an SBA loan, I will add that the seller can only stay on for 12 months post-closing. So just make sure there aren't any agreements that are in place beyond 12 months on an SBA deal.
That's good to know. Nice little tidbit there. Price of admission, worth just that one, yeah. The question was pros and cons of an employee-based earnout or employees buying the company.
Want me to take it? Okay. It can work great and it can work terrible. So generally a couple things to just be really careful about. Some employees are entrepreneurial, but a lot of employees aren't. And the reason they're employees is because they are not entrepreneurial. So to turn and take them and put them now in charge, it goes against their core, it goes against who they are. So that's something that really needs to be thought through, and make sure that if you're gonna turn it over to these employees, they are actually able to run the business. The other thing is, a lot of people, this business is their nest egg. This is their retirement. And so they need to get some money out at closing. They don't want it all just being paid out over time. So are the employees able to come up with the funds to do the buyout? And Melissa, you could probably address that a little bit better from a banking perspective. I can just address it from more of a personal perspective. So, do you have anything to add? Or?
We could maybe talk offline. I feel like that could get pretty deep.
Can I just make one super quick comment? That the only thing that I would say that I've seen for ones that go really, really well versus go poorly is that there's a really, really crystal clear definition between the roles and responsibilities of an owner and how those are, there's a very fine or firm line between the roles as an owner versus the roles in the business. And yes, owners can get fired, and no, you as an owner don't get any additional say outside of what your roles and responsibilities are in the business. So clear definition early and upfront that ownership interest doesn't give you any additional rights or veto power in the business.
And then again, to remind everybody, Dan also does EOS implementation as well as the technology stuff. So that's an EOS like right up there at the top. So anyway, so speaking of technology, let's stay there for a moment. Dan and Sam, kind of from the professional lens of folks in the technology world and the digital marketing world, from your point of view, what makes companies the most valuable?
Go ahead.
So we look purely at digital assets from our company, and one of the best ways that we determine if a website's valuable or not is the amount of traffic or leads that it gets, because traffic usually goes into leads, right? And so it's easy to make a small investment in your website that will pay off long term, because SEO is a long-lasting effect on your website that can generate leads. But it's also important to realize that when you're hitting those goals consistently via traffic or leads, right, that when you're merging, that needs to survive the merge as well. Otherwise, you just broke everything, right? And I don't think the buyer's going to be too happy. There was actually just an instance where a website, a famous website, sold for about $600,000. It was a 5-page website, had no product, sold for $600,000. What's interesting is 3 months after it sold, the website was then penalized by Google, and its traffic hit 0. Oh. That buyer was not too happy, as you can imagine, because their investment was now wasted. And so I'm not sure what they did to remedy the situation, but valuation to us all comes in the form of website traffic and leads.
Okay, right on. So I think the way to maximize value through technology is making technology like you put $1 into technology and you get $10 out. I mean, I think that's the way to think about it. So finding ways to make smart investments in technology so that you get and maximize return on investment. And the top 10 list I shared with you are some ways to do that. And we talked a little bit about enterprise or line of business applications that can help you do that. And so I think that one of the key takeaways, and even we've been doing this and helping our clients do this, is unplug from those desktop-based applications that you have to install and manage and maintain. They're kind of expensive, frankly, nowadays, and move to cloud and browser-based applications. So makes your business just much more flexible, enables your people to work from anywhere. Perfect example is moving from QuickBooks on our desktop to a cloud-based accounting package called Xero. And that has been how helpful that's been to us to have our numbers at our fingertips at all times. So I think enabling people to work from anywhere with technology is another way to help increase value.
Great, thank you. All right, so I want to weave one more question in, and then I'll get another couple from the audience. Peggy, and then maybe even Melissa, talk just a little bit about the process of valuing companies.
Okay. Again, I'm going to focus on the less than 10 million in revenue. Maybe just ask quick. I mean, how many here want to hear about businesses with less than 10 million in revenue? Raise your hand. And how many with more than 10 million? Okay, most people are wanting to hear about less than 10, so I'll stay focused on that. The biggest single driver in understanding what your business is worth is really how much cash flow the business drives. And when we look at cash flow, what we're looking at is as if a new owner is going to come into the business, how much can they take out in terms of a salary, have the money to pay down on debt, and then have some cushion left. And that's what we're going to call seller's discretionary earnings. So you might see that term, seller's discretionary earnings. Sometimes it's called cash flow. Sometimes it's called EBITDA. It's called a lot of different things. The biggest difference with seller's discretionary earnings, and something that's really important to keep in mind, is we start with net income, but different owners run their business differently. And so you can have two businesses that are really exactly the same. They both do 900,000 in revenue. They both have gross margins of 50%, but one has additional expenses of 450,000, so net income is 0. And the other one has additional expenses of 100,000, so the net income is 350. But once you peel back the onion a little bit and look what those expenses are, what you're going to see is it's the owner's taking a very large salary. They've got cars that are used by themselves, their kids, their spouse. They are buying Vikings tickets. They're just doing a lot of personal things and expensing it through the business. So we want to make sure that you can look at it from an apples to apples comparison, which is why we use that seller's discretionary earnings. So from there, typical multiples on businesses in that size range from 2 to 6 on the higher end, and it's going to depend on what type of industry you're in, how involved you are in the business, if there's good room for growth, if you have a lot of customers versus customer concentration. So there's a whole number of factors that go into that. The biggest thing I see is people kind of calculate their cash flow and quickly do that number and say, well, that's worth this, but they're not adding everything back. So just use somebody and make sure you're really understanding what that value is.
And Sunbelt will do a valuation for free.
For free, yep. So I'm happy to do that. I've done it for a number of people. I've got some clients I've worked with for 5 or 6 years that just were slowly building their business, and we kind of kept updating it once a year, and then it comes time to sell. So if anybody's interested in understanding what it's currently worth and what they can maybe do to help make it worth more, I'm happy to do that at no cost.
Sure, yeah. I'll add a few things. Peggy is definitely the most qualified out of all of us up here to talk about valuations, but I can shed a bit of light on this topic based on what I'm seeing. So as Peggy mentioned, most companies are valued based on some multiple of seller's discretionary earnings. However, there's some industries, medical services, insurance, financial planning practices where they're based off of revenue, the top line over the past 3 years. So I'm working with a dental service organization right now that's buying up dental practices, and they're offering between 0.85 to 1 times total revenue. So it depends on the industry, and it also depends on the type of buyers you're attracting. Are they financial buyers, individuals? Are they strategic buyers? Are they private equity? Are you doing an ESOP? As this gentleman talked about, are you doing a management buyout? Is it a family office? It really depends on the types of buyers, and more specifically on the 10 million plus. There's just a large range of different types of buyers out there. So based on what I'm seeing in the market and the conversations that I'm having, I jotted down a few of the multiple ranges, which Tom Phelan would say would be a disservice to give you a guideline, but I always like to know the guidelines and kind of what's out there in the market. So Peggy talked about the range for financial buyers, which right now are in the 3 to 5 times range. Private equity is 4 to 7 times. Strategics can offer 6 to 10 times, and ESOPs are in the 5 to 6 times. And as I mentioned, recapitalization, family offices, management buyouts, they're really all over the board. I used to think that management buyouts were in the 5 to 7 times range, but I've been working with a number of managers within companies that have been extremely successful at negotiating a lower purchase price. And that could be something to do with the sellers wanting to leave a legacy and feeling like selling to their managers is more important to them from a personal standpoint than selling to an outside buyer. And so last year I was working with a financial planning practice, and to an outside buyer, they probably could have got 2 times top line revenue based on the size of that business, but the managers were able to negotiate 1 times total revenue, and it ended up being a good deal for everyone involved. So as the attorneys like to say, it depends.
Lisa, would that be your answer? It depends?
I'll go
Okay.
with that.
All right, okay. We're getting close to the end, but if somebody had a short question, well, you already got one in. Over here somewhere. Yes, Kristen.
Just go ahead and speak. Hi, Kristen Boss. I'm with Insperity. We work to outsource or augment HR operations. Lisa, I noticed in your sample that you provided to us that there are about 3 pages related to employees during a sale or an M&A. My question is for those companies that maybe find themselves, to use Dan's term, on the trailing edge of having an HR platform in place. What are the pitfalls or maybe the advantages for those companies that have got that area of their business buttoned up?
So if you didn't hear the question over here, it was about HR, and Kristen works at Insperity, and the benefits of having a more robust HR offering versus maybe the pitfalls of not. Lisa?
Yeah. Is that a good way of summarizing? Well, it depends.
I knew that was coming.
That one was free. It will depend on, I think, the nature of your business and your industry. What I think most buyers are going to look for a company that's well run and run in compliance with law. And in the benefits sector, in the HR sector, most companies are pretty knowledgeable about what those laws are, but there are a lot of them. Particularly in benefits, it can get very technical. So there's sort of a minimum expectation of what you're doing in your business and operating in compliance with basic employment laws. I see a lot of companies that might be for sale, but yet there'll be an issue in their benefit plan compliance. That, in my experience, is not atypical, but usually in the due diligence process, either if I'm representing the seller, but I haven't worked with the company before, early in the process, we'll be looking at their documents as well and identifying the gaps, or same if we're working on behalf of the buyer. Usually we're able to say, well, here's what you've not been doing, and here's the best way to fix it. And that's going to add value for both parties, because ideally it's something that doesn't impact revenues on a go-forward basis repetitively, so you're not going to be seeing a multiple of earnings reduction in the purchase price by uncovering an issue. But so I'm not sure. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. So, I mean, my experience has been working with some of my clients that are going through this process, is that to have this all taken care of has actually added value to their business because they're worried about attracting and retaining those employees through their sale. So that has been key, at least in my experience, to make sure that that is gotten done.
And actually, I'm going to jump in. So Kristen, thank you for the question, and Kristen also has done some of these panels and stuff. But see, Kristen, if you have a HR question, or Lisa, I want to give everybody kind of one last chance. So to wrap it up for our panelists here, kind of a quick, short, hard-hitting answer, 30 seconds or less. A nugget of wisdom or two to leave with the audience to give a perspective, whether it's something you want them to remember and do, or something you want them to avoid and steer clear of, but just kind of one or two little nuggets to leave everybody with. And whoever would like to go, feel free.
I'll start. I would say have realistic expectations about how long the process is going to take and what it entails. You obviously, as a seller, you want a shorter process, even as a buyer too, but you want time to dig in. But in my experience, it's 3 to 6 months to do a deal. If it's an auction process, you're going to look at a longer time frame, 6 to 12 months, by the time you've started with your broker. There's going to be a lot of work pulling the information together. Plan on evenings and weekends, and don't plan vacations during that time frame. Mm-hmm. And know that you are, it's going to be really important for you to hit your results during that time frame, because there's going to be the opportunity for the buyer to renegotiate the price while you're in that negotiation period and due diligence period. So realize this is more than one person really typically can do and wants to take on. So put your management team together internally, who you trust, who's the expert in the different areas, and think about the fact that you're probably going to need to pay them retention bonuses. And maybe that was part of your question. If they're not owners and they're not going to share in the windfall of the transaction, you're going to be asking a lot of these people, and you're going to want them there because it's going to stabilize the value if the buyer knows they can come in and have the same management team in place. So those are some things to think about.
All right, maybe I'll jump in and just say, once you've got some great new apps that you're rolling out in your organization, take the time to train everyone on how to use them and try to make the ABC company way for how we use whatever software it is, so that everybody's using them consistently with your brand to help deliver great service to your customers.
Yeah, I'll mention two things. So as a seller, just be wary of telling your employees too soon. You may need to tell a couple of your key employees to the extent they can be supportive in putting together some documents for you for the buyer. But just be really careful about telling your employees too soon. And for a seamless transition, you may need to, as Lisa said, have the buyer offer some retention bonuses for those key people to stay. Otherwise, if your employees start finding out that you're selling, it could really be bad for everyone involved, and those people could get spooked about the sale and leave. The other thing I'll mention is, as a seller and buyer, it's important to prioritize your issues. You're not going to win on every issue that is related to the sale. So give when you can give, and be flexible where you can be flexible. And on areas that are really important to you, figure out a way to negotiate them to resolution and hold your ground on issues that need to be held on. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Couple things just in terms of value. Again, I think the number one thing that you can do is make yourself replaceable. Be that owner that can be gone for a month and the company can run on its own. As far as other takeaways, there's pens on the table, take them away. I'll just leave it at that.
So first, we do not want to forget our digital assets. That's pretty simple, right? So second of all, I did not think of this before we came up here, but the discussion of reputation management arose, right? One of our core services that dominate with SEO is reputation management. There are very specific strategies that can help you manage your online reputation and that may shed a light on the positive aspects of your business, okay? These strategies can help you mitigate your exposure, and the strategy can change from situation to situation, but it's good to plan ahead and try and get ahead of any skeletons you may have in your closet before you try and sell your business, because these strategies take a while to fulfill and implement, but it may save you down the road.
All right, great. Okay, again, Built to Sell would be worth reading for anybody thinking about actually either buying or selling, but for sure selling. And with that, let's thank our panelists.